You were about to give up. But what if I told you? Your miracle is already on its way. Don't stop now. The silence you feel isn't God's absence. It's His preparation for your breakthrough. When you pray and it feels like heaven has gone quiet, remember this truth. God's silence is not His absence. The moments when your prayers seem to echo back unanswered are not signs that God has turned away from you. They are often the very seasons when He is working the hardest on your behalf. Faith is not proven in the times when everything makes sense. It's proven in the dark, quiet moments when nothing does. When God seems silent, He is usually arranging something greater than you could have imagined, preparing a door that requires your patience to find the handle. Every believer will face moments where heaven seems still. You pray, you cry, you fast, and yet the situation doesn't change. It feels as though God is watching from a distance, unmoved by your tears. But silence is God's classroom where faith graduates to trust. When God is silent, He is not ignoring you. He's inviting you deeper. Silence forces you to lean not on feelings, but on faith. It pushes you to remember that the same God who spoke galaxies into existence does not need to speak every second to remain in control. He is still sovereign, even when He says nothing. Think about the story of Lazarus. Jesus loved Lazarus, but when He heard that his friend was dying, He didn't rush to heal him. He stayed where he was for 2 more days. To the family, it must have felt like silence, even neglect. But Jesus delayed because there was a greater glory ahead. If He had healed Lazarus before death, it would have been a miracle. But when He raised him after 4 days in the tomb, it became a revelation of resurrection power. Sometimes God delays because He's planning, not just to fix your situation, but to transform your faith. The silence of God has purpose. It refines your heart, deepens your endurance, and reveals your motives. It exposes whether you love Him for what He gives or for who He is. Many people only praise when the blessings flow, but true worship is birthed in the valley of unanswered prayers. When you can lift your hands and say, God, I don't understand You, but I still trust You. That's when you've stepped into mature faith. Job said, though He slay me, yet will I trust Him. That's the kind of faith that makes hell tremble. If God answered every prayer instantly, faith would never grow. Imagine if every seed sprouted the moment you buried it. There would be no waiting, no patience, no perseverance. But God designed seasons for a reason. Just as a seed must remain buried in darkness before it breaks forth into life, your prayers often go through a hidden stage. God's silence is the soil in which miracles are rooted. When you feel like nothing is happening, it doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is happening where you can't see it yet. Even Jesus experienced silence on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? He cried. In that moment, the Son of God felt the full weight of divine silence. Yet that silence wasn't abandonment. It was redemption unfolding. The Father was still present, working salvation through what seemed like silence. So if you feel forsaken, understand that God's silence is never final. The cross proves that even when heaven is quiet, heaven is not absent. The truth is, God speaks through silence. His quiet seasons train you to hear His still, small voice, to recognize His presence in ways that words could never teach. In silence, you learn to listen with your spirit, not your ears. You begin to discern His peace even when He doesn't speak. Silence teaches you that faith isn't built on evidence, it's built on trust. So if you are in a silent season, don't give up. Don't mistake divine stillness for divine inactivity. The same God who parted the Red Sea can part your storm in a moment. But sometimes He waits until the water is at your chin before He acts, so that when He does, you'll know it was Him alone who saved you. The waiting is not punishment, it's preparation. The silence is not rejection, it's redirection. Maybe you've been praying for healing, for a breakthrough, for a relationship to be restored, or for financial relief. You've cried, "Lord, do you even hear me?" Let this message remind you, He hears every whisper. He collects every tear. The Bible says not one sparrow falls to the ground without the Father noticing. How much more does He notice you? The silence may last for a night, but His promise is that joy will come in the morning. When God is silent, remember what He's already said. His word is not silent. His promises have not expired. Go back to what He spoke before the silence began. Those words are still alive. You may not feel Him, but faith doesn't depend on feelings. Faith is walking when you can't see the path, trusting that God is leading you through even when the map is blank. God's silence doesn't mean He's far. It means He's close enough to trust you with stillness. Parents often go quiet when they're letting their children take their first steps alone. The silence isn't absence, it's confidence. It means the Father knows you can handle this moment, that He has already equipped you for what's coming. So before you give up, pause. Breathe. Pray again. You may not hear Him now, but one day, when you look back, you'll see that every moment of silence had purpose. Every unanswered prayer was leading you towards something better. God is not late. He's not ignoring you. He's orchestrating your story with precision. And when the silence breaks, when the doors open, when the miracle comes, you'll realize that His silence was never empty. It was filled with divine love, working quietly, powerfully, and perfectly for your good. Hold on. The silence is not the end of your story. It's the space before the miracle begins. Prayer has a mysterious way of transforming our hearts long before it changes our circumstances. Many people approach prayer as a last resort, something to turn to when nothing else works. But true prayer is not an escape from reality. It is an encounter with the living God who shapes reality. When you fall to your knees, you are not just sending words into the air. You are entering the presence of the Creator. And in that sacred space, something shifts, not just around you, but within you. Desperation drives us to pray, but revelation keeps us praying. When life pushes you to the edge, when the weight feels unbearable, and when the doors refuse to open, prayer becomes more than words. It becomes your lifeline. In those moments, your heart cries out, not because you have strength left, but because you've reached the end of yourself. That is where God begins. Desperation strips away pride, control, and all the masks we wear. It leaves us raw, real, and open before God. And in that broken place, heaven speaks. When Hannah wept in the temple, her prayer didn't come with polished words or perfect theology. It came with groaning, tears, and anguish. But that desperate cry opened the way for revelation. God didn't just give her a child, He gave her Samuel, a prophet who would anoint kings and change the destiny of a nation. Her desperation turned into divine revelation because she met God not with formality, but with sincerity. True prayer is not about eloquence, it's about authenticity. God responds not to volume, but to vulnerability. Every powerful encounter in Scripture began with someone who was desperate enough to seek God wholeheartedly. Jacob wrestled with the angel through the night and refused to let go until he was blessed. That struggle left him limping, but also renamed. Prayer will do that. It will mark you. It may not remove your struggle, but it will redefine your identity. Jacob walked into that night as a deceiver and came out as Israel, the one who prevailed with God. Desperation made him hold on, revelation made him new. When you pray out of desperation, you are not just asking for relief, you are positioning yourself for revelation. God doesn't just change your situation, He changes your perspective. Through prayer, the same storm that threatened to drown you becomes the wave that lifts you higher. Prayer turns panic into peace, confusion into clarity, and weakness into worship. It reorients your vision so you stop telling God how big your mountain is and start telling your mountain how big your God is. Jesus Himself showed us this in the Garden of Gethsemane. In His agony, He prayed until His sweat became like drops of blood. He didn't pray to escape the cross, He prayed to embrace God's will. In that moment, His desperation was transformed into revelation. The Father's silence became strength, and the Son's surrender became salvation for the world. Prayer didn't remove the pain, it revealed the purpose behind it. Many people quit praying because they think nothing is happening. But what if something is happening inside you that is more important than what you asked for? Sometimes, God doesn't answer right away because He's using the waiting to mold your heart. When you kneel before Him, your tears water the soil of faith, and in that sacred exchange, you begin to see life differently. The burden may still be there, but it doesn't crush you anymore, because prayer lifts you above it. Prayer is not just communication, it's transformation. It takes your complaints and turns them into confessions of trust. It takes your fear and turns it into faith. You enter prayer saying, "Lord, I can't," and leave saying, "But I know you can." When you pray, you align your will with His. You stop fighting the process and start trusting His plan. The more you pray, the more your heart begins to echo heaven's rhythm. Sometimes God allows desperation so He can reveal Himself in ways you've never known. If everything in your life were easy, you would never experience His power in your weakness. You would never know His peace in your chaos or His strength in your sorrow. Desperation becomes the doorway to intimacy. When life is stripped of all its noise, prayer becomes the place where you truly meet God. The pain that drives you to your knees is often the same pain that opens your eyes. In the depths of prayer, you realize that answers are not the goal, relationship is. When you seek God's hand, you might get a gift, but when you seek His face, you get His heart. And once you've touched His heart, you begin to see that even unanswered prayers are guided by divine love. God may not give you what you want, but He will always give you what you need. Prayer is where you stop trying to change God's mind and let Him change yours. When Paul prayed for his thorn to be removed, God didn't take it away. Instead, he said, "My grace is sufficient for you." That moment was revelation. Paul's perspective shifted from pleading for relief to boasting in weakness. Through prayer, he discovered that the power of God is made perfect not in strength, but in surrender. That is the kind of revelation that only comes when you pray through your pain instead of walking away from it. Prayer also teaches you that your circumstances do not define your faith. Your faith defines your response to circumstances. You begin to realize that your greatest victories often come disguised as battles. The very thing you begged God to remove might be the tool He uses to refine you. When you pray, "Lord, take this storm away," and He doesn't, maybe it's because He intends to teach you how to walk on water instead. In prayer, desperation becomes revelation because God shows you not just His power but His presence. You begin to sense Him in the details, in the stillness, in the peace that doesn't make sense, in the courage that rises when fear should have crushed you. That's when you know prayer is working. Not because the situation changed, but because you did. You find yourself standing taller, breathing calmer, speaking faith instead of fear. So, when life feels too heavy and you're tempted to give up, pray. Not as a last option, but as your first weapon. Cry if you must, groan if you can't speak, but don't stay silent. Heaven hears broken prayers just as clearly as bold ones. Every whisper from a sincere heart shakes eternity. You may not see the answer today, but every time you pray, something in the unseen world moves. Prayer turns desperation into revelation because it brings you face to face with the one who sees the end from the beginning. And once you've touched His presence, you can never see life the same way again. You realize that even in the waiting, God is working. Even in the silence, He's speaking. Even in the heartbreak, He's healing. Prayer doesn't just change things, it changes you. And that change is often the miracle you needed most. There are moments in life when giving up feels like the only logical choice. You've prayed, believed, waited, and yet nothing seems to shift. It feels like God has gone quiet, like the heavens are closed, and you're standing on the edge of surrender. But what if that very moment, the one where you're ready to quit, is the point where the breakthrough is closest? So many people walk away one prayer too soon, one act of faith too early, one breath before the miracle unfolds. God's timing is rarely early, but it is always perfect. And sometimes, the greatest test of faith is holding on when everything in you wants to let go. You are closer to your breakthrough than you think. The enemy's loudest roar often comes right before his defeat. The storm always rages fiercest before it runs out of rain. The darkest hour truly comes before dawn, And in the same way, your hardest battle usually arrives just before your greatest blessing. When life feels unbearable, it's not a sign that God has abandoned you. It's a sign that something divine is being birthed within you. Every great promise in Scripture was preceded by great pressure. Before Joseph reached the palace, he was betrayed by family, enslaved by strangers, and forgotten in prison. Before Moses parted the Red Sea, he was trapped between the water and Pharaoh's army. Before Jesus rose in glory, he hung in agony. Every resurrection requires a crucifixion first. The truth is, God often allows you to come to the end of yourself so that you can finally see His hand. When your strength runs out, His begins. When your plans collapse, His purpose stands firm. Sometimes God doesn't remove the obstacle because He's using it to reveal the overcomer in you. You can't discover the power of God by walking an easy road. You find it by walking through valleys and realizing you were never alone. Faith is not proven in comfort. It's proven in contradiction. When life doesn't make sense, and you choose to trust Him anyway, that's when faith shines brightest. Every delay you've faced has not been a denial. It's been divine timing. God's not yet doesn't mean no. It means I'm preparing something better. You may think you've been waiting on God, but often He's been waiting on you. To grow, to mature, to let go of fear, to stop trying to control outcomes, and to trust Him completely. Breakthroughs are not just about circumstances changing. They're about hearts aligning with heaven. Sometimes your miracle is waiting for your mindset to catch up with God's promise. When you shift from "why me" to "use me," everything changes. The enemy knows how close you are, and that's why he's fighting you harder now than ever before. He wants to convince you that it's useless, that your prayers aren't working, that your faith has been wasted. But remember, Satan attacks most fiercely what he fears most deeply. If you're under heavy pressure, it's because heaven has placed great potential inside you. Diamonds are made under pressure. Gold is purified by fire. The intensity of your trial is a reflection of the greatness of your calling. You may feel weary, but God hasn't forgotten. You're not running out of time. You're running into purpose. Look at Peter, who toiled all night fishing and caught nothing. Exhausted and discouraged, he was ready to pack up and go home. But then Jesus said, "Cast your net on the other side." That one act of obedience turned failure into abundance. What if Peter had given up an hour earlier? He would have missed the miracle waiting just beneath the surface. Many believers stop praying just before the tide turns, stop believing right before the wall crumbles, stop sowing right before the harvest breaks through the soil. God doesn't ask you to understand His timing. He asks you to trust it. Sometimes the breakthrough doesn't come in the way you expect. You may be praying for God to open a door, and instead, He builds a new one. You may be asking for Him to remove the storm, but He gives you the strength to walk through it. Breakthrough is not always the absence of struggle. It's the presence of victory within the struggle. It's when you realize that even if the situation hasn't changed, your spirit has. The peace of God has taken root in your heart, and that peace itself becomes proof that God is near. Hold on to hope even when your hands are trembling. God's promises never expire. Abraham waited decades for Isaac, but when the time was right, what God said came to pass. David was anointed long before he sat on the throne. There is always a gap between promise and fulfillment, and that gap is where faith is forged. Don't mistake delay for defeat. What looks like a setback is often a setup. The process is preparing you for the promise. You cannot skip the waiting room and still be ready for the blessing when it comes. You are closer than you realize. Every prayer you've prayed, every tear you've shed, every step you've taken in faith, it's all been recorded in heaven. None of it is wasted. God bottles every tear, counts every sleepless night, and hears every whispered prayer. He knows exactly when to release your answer, and when He does, it will be so clear that you'll realize why it took so long, because He wasn't just preparing the blessing for you, He was preparing you for the blessing. When the pressure feels unbearable, don't curse it. Let it push you to your knees. Pray again, worship again, trust again. Faith isn't proven when you have all the answers, it's proven when you still believe in the dark. God is never late. His clock doesn't run on human time. You may feel stuck, but heaven's plan is still advancing. Every closed door, every painful detour, every season of silence, it's all part of a story being written with divine precision. So, before you give up, remember your breakthrough might already be on its way. The angel might already be dispatched. The answer might already be in motion. You don't need to see it to believe it. You just need to hold on long enough for faith to finish its work. The pain you're feeling today will soon become the testimony that strengthens someone else tomorrow. Don't let weariness rob you of what you've been praying for. You've come too far to stop now. The same God who brought you through before will bring you through again. The same hand that carried you through the last storm will not drop you in this one. You may not understand how or when, but you can trust the who. And when that breakthrough finally comes, and it will, you'll realize that the waiting, the tears, the trials, and even the silence were all worth it. Because God's promise always arrives right on time, and His timing is never late for those who refuse to give up.